By 1861, the United States had become a nation deeply divided. Several southern states declared they had left the Union, while the federal government rejected that claim. In practice, the country was preparing to fight itself. For more than 70 years, one question had quietly poisoned the young republic. Could a nation founded on the promise that all men are created equal continue to permit the enslavement of nearly 4 million people? In April of that year, that question stopped being debated. Brothers would fight brothers. Friends would become enemies. Families would find themselves on opposite sides of the battlefield. For 4 long years, the future of the United States and the meaning of freedom itself would hang in the balance. This is the story of America's darkest 4 years. He hadn't even taken office, and already the country was falling apart. Abraham Lincoln never campaigned to abolish slavery everywhere immediately. His promise was narrower, but still explosive. He opposed the expansion of slavery into the Western territories. For many Southern leaders, even that was unacceptable. Within weeks of Lincoln's election, South Carolina announced it was leaving the Union. 6 more states followed before he was even inaugurated. Together they formed the Confederate States of America, a government built with the protection of slavery at its core, treating enslaved people as property under its laws. For millions of enslaved men, women, and children, these events offered no immediate freedom. But they hinted that the nation they had lived under all their lives was beginning to fracture. And with that fracture came a fragile hope that the future might someday be different. Lincoln had not fired a single shot. He had not signed a major law. Yet much of the South had already decided it would rather leave the Union than accept his presidency. When he finally took office in March 1861, he inherited not a united republic, but a nation already on the edge of war. No one wanted to fire the first shot, but history running out of patience. Major Robert Anderson commanded fewer than 100 Union soldiers inside Fort Sumter, a federal fortress sitting alone in Charleston Harbor. Around him stood thousands of Confederate troops. For months, both sides hesitated. Neither wanted to be remembered as the side that began the war, but compromise had reached its limit. At 4:30 on the morning of April 12, 1861, Confederate artillery opened fire. For 34 relentless hours, Anderson's small garrison endured bombardment with dwindling supplies, little ammunition, and no realistic hope of relief. Finally, he agreed to surrender. Remarkably, despite the continuous shelling, no soldiers on either side were killed during the bombardment itself. That extraordinary fact would soon be overshadowed. Within days, newspapers carried the story across the nation. For many Americans, the debate was over. This was no longer a constitutional crisis or a political dispute. The United States was at war with itself. Many believed the war would be over before dinner. They could not have been more wrong. In July 1861, many Americans believed a single battle would decide the war. Politicians, journalists, and curious spectators from Washington traveled to nearby hills carrying picnic baskets, expecting to witness a quick Union victory before returning home that evening. Instead, they watched thousands of frightened young men experience real combat for the very first time. Neither army was truly prepared. Officers struggled to control inexperienced volunteers. Battle lines dissolved into smoke and confusion. As Confederate forces pushed back the Union advance, panic spread across the battlefield. Soldiers and civilians fled together toward Washington, turning an organized retreat into chaos. The First Battle of Bull Run shattered the illusion of a short war. The men who returned home that night understood something the rest of the nation was only beginning to realize. This conflict would not be decided in a single afternoon. It would demand years of sacrifice and a terrible human cost that few could yet imagine. He never finished writing the letter, neither did thousands of others. By September 1862, hopes for a quick victory had vanished. Near Antietam Creek in Maryland, Union and Confederate armies fought a battle that remains the bloodiest single day in American military history. By nightfall, more than 23,000 men had been killed, wounded, or reported missing. Across the battlefield, a volunteer nurse named Clara Barton carried water, medicine, and bandages directly to the wounded, often working within range of enemy fire. Years later, she would found the American Red Cross. But on that day, she was simply one person trying to save as many lives as possible. Far from the battlefield, telegrams arrived in towns across both the North and the South. Each one carried news that families had feared since the war began. A father, a brother, a husband, a son. Many would never return home. Militarily, Antietam ended without a decisive winner. But strategically, it gave President Lincoln something he had been waiting for, an opportunity to announce a decision that would permanently change the purpose of the war. With one signature, the war became about more than preserving the Union. On January 1, 1863, Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. The document declared enslaved people in Confederate-controlled territory to be free. Its immediate legal effect was limited. It did not instantly free every enslaved person, and its enforcement depended on Union military success. Yet its importance reached far beyond the words on the page. The proclamation transformed the character of the war. Preserving the Union remained the central goal, but ending slavery had now become an official Union war aim as well. For countless enslaved families, it offered something many had scarcely dared to imagine: hope. As Union armies advanced, that hope increasingly became reality. Nearly 200,000 black men would serve in the Union Army and Navy during the remainder of the war. Many fought knowing that if captured, they faced execution or re-enslavement rather than treatment as ordinary prisoners of war. Among the strongest voices urging black enlistment was Frederick Douglass. Having escaped slavery himself, Douglass argued that military service would demonstrate beyond question that black Americans deserved not only freedom, but full citizenship in the nation they were helping to save. The Civil War had entered a new chapter. It was no longer only a struggle to preserve the United States. It had become a struggle over what freedom itself would mean. His men had almost no ammunition left. Then he gave an order that should never have worked. In July 1863, Union Colonel Joshua Chamberlain and the 20th Maine Regiment defended the far left of the Union line at Little Round Top. Wave after wave of Confederate attacks pushed them to the brink. Their ammunition was almost gone. Retreat meant exposing the entire Union flank. Rather than fall back, Chamberlain made a desperate decision. He ordered a bayonet charge downhill. Against expectations, it worked. The Confederate assault collapsed, and the Union line held. Just 2 days later, General Robert E. Lee made one final gamble at Gettysburg. Nearly 12,000 Confederate soldiers crossed open ground in what became known as Pickett's Charge. Union artillery and rifle fire devastated the advancing ranks. Lee's invasion of the North had failed. While Gettysburg captured the nation's attention, another turning point unfolded hundreds of miles away. On July 4th, Union General Ulysses S. Grant captured the Confederate fortress of Vicksburg, giving the Union complete control of the Mississippi River and splitting the Confederacy in two. Together, Gettysburg and Vicksburg transformed the war. The Confederacy would continue fighting for almost 2 more years, but from this point forward, victory became increasingly unlikely. Winning battles was no longer enough. Sherman intended to end the Confederacy's ability to wage war. By late 1864, Union General William Tecumseh Sherman adopted what many historians describe as a strategy of hard war. His goal extended beyond defeating Confederate armies. He aimed to destroy the railroads, factories, supply depots, and infrastructure that allowed those armies to keep fighting. Sherman's march from Atlanta to Savannah cut a path across Georgia, targeting military resources while also bringing hardship to civilians living in the war zone. For many Southern families, the war was no longer something happening on distant battlefields. It had reached their towns, farms, and homes. Meanwhile, many Confederate soldiers faced severe shortages of food, clothing, and equipment. Desertions increased. Letters home revealed growing despair. The optimism that had greeted the war in 1861 had long since disappeared. Victory would now belong to whichever side could endure the longest. The war ended with extraordinary generosity. 5 days later, tragedy struck again. On April 9, 1865, General Robert E. Lee surrendered the Army of Northern Virginia to General Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse. Grant deliberately offered generous terms. Confederate soldiers were allowed to return home after laying down their arms and agreeing not to resume fighting. Many were permitted to keep their horses for the spring planting season. Grant believed lasting peace would come through reconciliation rather than humiliation. Although scattered fighting continued briefly in other parts of the South, Appomattox marked the effective end of the Civil War's largest campaigns. For a few hopeful days, it seemed the nation might finally begin to heal. Then tragedy struck. On the evening of April 14th, while attending a performance at Ford's Theater, President Abraham Lincoln was shot by John Wilkes Booth. He died the following morning. The man who had guided the Union through its greatest crisis would never witness the difficult work of rebuilding the nation he had fought to preserve. The Civil War claimed an estimated 620,000 to 750,000 lives, making it the deadliest conflict in American history. The Union survived. Later that same year, the 13th Amendment abolished slavery throughout the United States. But the country that emerged from the war was profoundly changed. Entire communities had been devastated. Millions of formerly enslaved people faced the enormous challenge of building new lives in freedom while confronting uncertainty, discrimination, and violence. The fighting had ended. The struggle over equality, citizenship, and the meaning of freedom had only begun. America had answered one question: could the Union survive? It could. But another question remained. Could the nation truly deliver on its founding promise that all people are created equal? That question would define the difficult years of Reconstruction, the next chapter in America's story. If you enjoyed this documentary, please subscribe to World We Know and join us as we uncover the stories that shaped our world. Until next time, keep discovering history.